Good evening and welcome to another episode of Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso and we are coming to you from the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls. Today's substance abuse has become a huge challenge for everyone living in the Finger Lakes, and our guest today is here on the organizational side of the fight. Over the last couple weeks, we have had two members of law enforcement here to talk about it. Now, though, Scott LaVigne, Director of Seneca County Mental Health, is here in studio. Scott, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this line of work.
Well, I went to graduate school to be a therapist originally, and when I came out, I wanted to work with families, and I found myself working in a substance abuse clinic, primarily working with families.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started, and from that, within a couple of years, I was soon not only working with families, but those that were involved in drug addiction, and then eventually managed that clinic, and then did that for a number of years. Did some private practice for a number of years, and then went back to school, got an MBA, and now I'm out here in Seneca County as the manager of both the mental health and the substance abuse programs that we have in the
Where are you from originally?
Originally I grew up in Wayne County, actually.
Okay.
The thriving metropolis of Marion.
Okay, so tell us, for those who, everyone knows what the Seneca County Mental Health program is generally, but talk to us about specifically what you guys are working on in terms of substance abuse and things like that.
Okay. Well, we have two basic programs that we operate within on the substance abuse side. The first would be our addictions program, and that's a county-run program located within the mental health department. It was first licensed in 1984 through the Division of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse Services, and began operations in 1985 as primarily an alcohol clinic. And then as those two state agencies merged, OASIS was formed, and that is the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services. As a result of that merger of those two state agencies, the clinic became an addictions clinic that focused on both alcohol and other drugs. That happened in 1990, and we've been providing treatment services there ever since then to both people with alcohol and other substance use disorders.
So, obviously things have changed a lot for you guys since the inception of the program and the department itself. What has been sort of the biggest challenge for you guys navigating the change that has taken place over the last, say, 5-10 years?
In terms of challenges and changes in the system, I'd say really this heroin epidemic has been a significant impact on our system as a whole. Very few of us were prepared for it. If you think about other recent drug trends, bath salts being a good example, they were relatively short-lived by comparison. This epidemic, and I do believe epidemic is a good way to phrase it, has been growing exponentially, and it really caught a lot of us in the treatment community by surprise.
So what are some of the, obviously everyone hears about it on the news and they see, like, so-and-so has been arrested or this drug bust took place at this place. What are sort of the prevention measures on your side, on the organizational side, to curb that before it gets to that stage, or even after, say, the legal system has worked out its action? What do you guys do?
Our prevention efforts are several-fold, actually. We have evidence-based programs that we deliver within the school setting. These are programs that are designed to prevent the onset of alcohol and other drug problems. And I have to be honest, they've been phenomenally successful in this county. In 2008, we did a youth development survey of youth in Seneca County, and at that point, their last day use of alcohol was around 30%, and their last day use of, and I'm going to have to look for the exact numbers, of cannabis cannabis was around 30%, and alcohol use was at 53%. Now, that was in 2008. In 2013, last 30-day use of cannabis was only 19%. So compared to 30 in 2008. And it dropped from 53% alcohol use to 35%. So those school-based programs have been very effective, and that's for seniors, senior year students. So that's been very effective. So those are just some of the evidence-based programs that we do within the school, and they're actually the outcomes that they produced. I guess looking at the broader community, and I'm not sure if you want to go in that direction
Sure,
at this point.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's probably helpful to kind of get an idea of where it's been, what the impact is right now, and what we're seeing, and that maybe will give a little context for this. So, our rates that I just quoted, those last 30-day rates, they're great compared to what they were, but we're still well above the state average for marijuana and alcohol consumption. Mm-hmm. So with that as the backdrop, we have a higher incidence among our youth of alcohol and drug use than New York State population as a whole. So we still have a lot of work left to do. And alcohol still remains the biggest problem. Now, when you drive down a little bit further and start to look at heroin, this just gives you some ideas. In the last, in a 15-month period from September of 2014 till December of 15, law enforcement administered 12 Narcan saves of the use of Narcan. It's an anti-overdose medication. 12, and that's unheard of. And one of those people still went on to die. From 2013, we've had 10 Seneca County residents that have died of opiate-related overdoses, also unheard of. I know you've had people talk about the drug arrests. They have skyrocketed. Yeah. But the arrests are just really the tip of the iceberg. When you look at some of the impacts that drives into our agency, we have increased numbers of people that are coming through with opiates on board. And I'm just going to look for the exact statistics on this because it's been a fairly significant increase. I think we've got approximately 34% of the people that have been admitted to our substance abuse treatment program have come in now with opiates on board. That's a phenomenally large increase from where we used to be.
Now, one of the things that we were talking about before we came on was just how the problem starts. And I feel like you gave a really good explanation as to how this develops. And it's worth repeating. Explain to everyone how this problem birthed itself.
Well, I mean, you have to go back not too far to a couple of things, and it was almost like a perfect storm of events. You had a dramatic increase in the prescription of opiate pain medications in the United States. And this county and this region was not immune to that. So doctors were writing increased numbers of prescriptions for pain medications. From that, many of these newer generation pain medications like Vicodin and Oxycontin and Oxycodone have a higher addiction potential than some of their predecessors. So you have a medication and medications that were overprescribed in many instances. Classic example is you go in to get your wisdom teeth pulled. You don't just get a 7-day supply, you get a 30-day supply. Most people take it for 1 or 2 days, maybe 3, they're done, they put them away, and they sit in their cupboard. So there you have an increased number of opiate medications flooding the market, doctors being more willing to prescribe them. And as a result, you have more people becoming addicted to prescription opiates. At the same time, or shortly thereafter, about 3 or 4 years ago, you have the implementation of something called iStop. And this was a program that was designed to cut down on the number of people that were doctor shopping to get prescriptions. So they could no longer go to multiple physicians to get prescriptions for pain medications. So you had an addicted population whose drug of choice was a prescription opiate, and they were now cut off from the legitimate means of getting those prescription opiates. And so they turned to the street. Well, like any other business, supply and demand dictates price. And the price of those prescription opiates went through the roof. As a result, people were looking for cheaper alternatives, and heroin enters the mix. It's about a quarter to even less than the price of a prescription opiate on the street. And so people started quickly turning to heroin as an alternative. Nobody, when they start a drug addiction, starts off shooting heroin. Most people start off with something else first. And so this is...
So, all right, so that kind of leads into what my next question was going to be. One of the things when we had Wayne County Sheriff Barry Virts on, he really pointed to this failed logic that it was primarily kids or just kids being impacted by this, or he suggested that there was a larger number of adults, older adults, who had, aches and pains that they were regularly being prescribed things for. Is there any, what do you guys have on the evidence side that trends to that that line of logic?
Okay. Well, I mean, the people that show up in our treatment program, the age groupings that I'm looking for it now, because they do tend to cluster around, and a lot of people thought it was younger adults. Actually, our biggest age grouping is not for the younger adults. Our biggest age grouping, and that by younger I'm referring to 16 to 21. Our bigger age grouping is from 22 to like 35.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where most of the people we're seeing in treatment are. Now, one could argue that their addiction began at much younger years, and they're just now matriculating into treatment, and that certainly could be an argument. But there was a hefty number of people that developed addiction later on in life. These drugs do have a much higher addiction potential, so they're much more dangerous than other drugs that we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. So what, you talked about it a little bit before, the marijuana versus heroin. What have been the big changes for you guys in terms of how you've had to handle things in terms of dealing with a big marijuana problem before to a seemingly massive heroin problem now?
Oh, well, the biggest change centers around the drugs themselves and what that means for treatment. Marijuana is usually smoked. The physiological impacts are not as acute. And so there's a lot less medical interventions that you need to have when you're looking at a marijuana dependency. When you're looking at heroin in particular, we've had to tailor our therapeutic approaches because of the dynamics of that drug use. We've also introduced medication-assisted therapies that we previously didn't utilize as heavily for other drugs of addiction. Okay. Specifically, we've had to introduce Suboxone and Vivitrol into that mix that we provide in our treatment programs. And we've had to get a doctor that can write prescriptions and monitor those drugs as they're administered. That's a big change in how we've had to do business.
And that leads to greater expense for you guys, right? I mean, that's part of the whole process of you're a government agency having to deal with these issues. I mean, it becomes more expensive for you guys to operate, right?
Right. The doctors that can prescribe, especially Suboxone, the government has limited the number of doctors and the number of patients those doctors can prescribe for. And that number's been capped at 100 per doctor. That's a serious limitation when you look at the fact that we frequently in these smaller communities have to share doctors. That 100 total is for all the agencies those doctors provide at. And so we get a far less number of that.
So what, walk people through what sort of the scenario could be if this problem isn't curbed or if things don't improve on the heroin front, because people are hearing a lot about it, they're seeing it in the paper a lot, but there is a series of events that could happen. Walk us through what that would look like for the average resident.
In terms of if we do nothing, this is what we're likely to see.
Like if what's the... Yeah, because people see it, and I feel like there's a certain level of disconnect. Like they see it in the paper and then they forget about it. But it isn't something we should be forgetting about, anyone. So what is sort of that call to action or that reason why everyone should care about this?
Well, unlike other drugs like bath salts, which I alluded to earlier, this drug, long after the wave of use starts to subside, is unfortunately going to be around us for some time to follow. And that's in large part due to the physiological nature of this drug dependency. There will be, if you look back to the 70s and late 60s when heroin use first spiked in the United States, there are still people on methadone maintenance from that first wave of heroin usage. That's 50 years later, 50 years later. That's a profound impact. So, and people have used the term epidemic, which at first I was kind of a little, I'm not sure about that. Well, it is an epidemic when you think of how quickly it's spreading. And that's where I think that terminology comes to pass. So in the beginning, everybody lost their minds around Ebola. We had one Ebola patient that showed up in New York City, and everybody lost their minds in terms of fearing that would spread. This is far more contagious, for lack of a better word, than Ebola could hope to be. Granted, it spreads in a completely different mechanism, but it's spreading very, very quickly. And if we don't address it now, it will quickly overwhelm our treatment centers. The majority of the people that we evaluate today, well, maybe not the majority, but an increasing number of people that we evaluate in our substance abuse clinic today, we can't even see on an outpatient basis. Their lives are too chaotic, their use too pronounced. They have to immediately go to inpatient. And so the numbers that I quote you were numbers that don't even reflect the people we evaluate and have to refer out.
Okay.
So why people should care, as I said, because if we don't do anything about it, it's going to continue to get worse. It's affecting a greater swath of the population than it was before, and it's cutting across all levels of the population.
Well, and you talked about it's not just necessarily the substance abuse itself, right? It's also the hepatitis C and the other sort of the illnesses that coincide with a nasty substance like that. What is the sort of, I mean, you can explain that a lot better than I can, but what does that look like for you? I mean, what's the impact that could have on, the average person?
I mean, the health system, our health system could get overwhelmed, given that a lot of people that are developing a heroin dependency eventually end up to some kind of illegal activity. And in this county, the main form of illegal activity that most heroin addicts will go to is actually dealing themselves. Not because they're major drug kingpins, but more so because they need that in order to be able to support their own addiction. And so they'll travel to Rochester and come back here and sell, and then keep the profit and pour it into their own addiction. So the reason I say that is because those folks are going to probably eventually end up in jail. And when that happens, you have somebody that's been an IV drug user who's now in jail. We now have to detox them while they're in jail because opiate withdrawal is very uncomfortable. So we have to detox. And then we have to provide treatment. We've had to hire a full-time substance abuse counselor for the county jail. And we are in the process of implementing and have just started a Vivitrol program, which is an injection that you can give to someone that'll last for 30 days that blocks the opiate receptor site in the brain, so that even if they were to leave and go out and use, they would not get high. And so it blocks people from even wanting to use, because why would you use if you know you're not going to get high? It's wasted money. So we're looking to get, and that lasts for 30 days. So if we time them leaving jail with an injection, they've got 30 days to get into a program, get engaged in that program, and establish their recovery.
So what are some of the warning signs of addiction? Because that's one of the, it's not the guy in the back alley. It's the everyman now. Talk to us about what that looks like.
Okay, well, quite honestly, and I've had to talk about this with parents a lot, the signs of addiction are pretty much almost classic signs of adolescence. And so what's really important is to recognize when you see a deviation from what your child has normally been like. Anytime somebody comes on and says, well, you should look for this or you should look for that, there are certain things where, yeah, that's clearly a sign. But generally speaking, what you want to do is you want to compare what you're seeing, and this is true for adults and children, to the behavior of the person over time. Something that's a radical departure. It's a change in appearance, a change in clothing, a change in music, a change in friends, a change in behaviors where somebody that was previously very dependable is now suddenly erratic. But once again, you want to measure it based on how they normally have been to you, so that and if they have used substances in the past, let's say alcohol, you notice that there's a dramatic change in how they've used those substances as well. Those can all be warning signs.
So what do you talk about adolescence, and that's a very good segue to our next topic here, is what kind of efforts do you guys have to go through to reach kids? And I would imagine that has to be a big part of what you do, just to prevent that next generation from becoming the generation that's a problem now, right?
Right, absolutely. I mean, the metaphor that we frequently use in substance abuse prevention work is the metaphor of a stream where you're standing at the stream and you see babies floating downstream, and you develop a way of rescuing the babies that are in the stream flowing down, and you get really good at rescuing babies. At some point, somebody says, hey, you know what? why are these babies ending up here? And maybe we ought to figure out how to stop them from being thrown in the water in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we look at with prevention. Part of what we do in this county is we have kind of a multi-pronged approach. We're looking at prevention in terms of school-based and evidence-based programs, which I've already talked about. One of the biggest forms of prevention that anybody can do is go to your medicine cabinet, open it up, and when you find a prescription opiate, immediately dispose of it. And we have a way in this county of disposing of those medications.
I was going to ask, what is the proper way of disposing? Because that might be one of the most. Is it just flush it, or is it like no? You don't do that, correct?
Don't want to do that. It
Yes.
ends up going into the water supply. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
So we have a whole history of fish that are addicted now. But no, there are drop boxes that are available in the main county office building here in Seneca County. You just go right in there. They ask that you peel the label back. It's on the first floor of the county office building. That's the public entrance just past motor vehicles. There's a drop box there. You just open it up, drop it in, close the door, you're good to go.
Simple.
If you live in the south part of the county, the law enforcement center also has a drop box. Once again, peel that label off so there's no identifying information. The only thing they ask is that you do not put any liquid medications in there or any needles or syringes or anything like that. But otherwise, and that's the number one thing. Parents, look at your own medicine cabinets. Adults, go to your parents' medication cabinet. Many times grandchildren get addicted by going to grandma and grandpa's medicine cabinet and finding a treasure trove of pain medications that they're no longer using. So that's a huge prevention thing that anybody can do.
So what, talking about here in Seneca County, what resources exist for those who either are addicted now or have a family member or a friend or something along those lines that is addicted? What is sort of what should the protocol be under those circumstances?
The main thing that people want to do is to get that person in for an evaluation as soon as possible. Now, a lot of times, and this is no shock to anyone, people that are addicted frequently don't want to get treatment.
Yeah.
And so it's important to recognize where that person is at. If they're in complete denial, they don't believe there's a problem, your options are a little bit different. You're looking at more of supporting that person, engaging them, trying to get them to recognize that you're on their side. You want them to be happy, healthy, and successful in life. Those are things that no one could disagree with. And then pointing out at some point, you know what? Your plan is to be happy, healthy, and successful, and you don't look very happy, healthy, or successful.
Yeah.
You say you want these things, and yet something's happening that's perfect. I don't know what to tell you, but I can tell you that from the outside, this doesn't look like it's working. Maybe you might want to talk to somebody. If they already know that you're somebody that's on their side, that gives them an opportunity to trust you a little bit more.
Yeah.
In treatment, very often people have been hit with that. You've got to remain abstinent, and you've got to come to a program, and you've got to get out of denial as quickly as possible. Well, that doesn't happen for a lot of people. So really it's engaging with them, and long-term recovery is best achieved when people know that they're surrounded by people who care about their well-being. As soon as they have that relationship, it becomes easier to hear what you have to say. Without that, it becomes very difficult.
So what, just as far as your organization's concerned, what kind of events, goals, plans, et cetera, you guys have coming up that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I mean, clearly what we're having to do is integrate a lot more medical care into our treatment programs. And that's something that we're definitely doing on both the substance abuse side and the mental health side, and that's going to be a big part. Unfortunately, people with alcohol and drug problems and mental health conditions are disproportionately represented in hospital admissions. They tend to be, have a disproportionate number of preventable hospital admissions. So we're looking, since most of those folks would prefer to get their primary care at our location rather than the doctor's, we're looking to combine the two.
Okay.
The other thing we're looking at on the substance abuse side is, and from a county perspective, not just from the organization of the addictions program, is increased opportunities for housing for people with substance abuse problems who are in recovery from those disorders, and employment opportunities.
Yeah.
employment is a huge deterrent to relapse. It's a strong indicator for long-term recovery if someone can get a job. And so it's a huge effort. We have a vocational counselor that we contract with to come into our clinic to provide services to get people work, because we know it's a huge relapse prevention factor. And we're hoping that with some of the increased employment opportunities in the county, that there might be some opportunities going forward for folks with addiction as well.
So before we get you out of here, there was one other thing we chatted about before we came on air, was the gambling addiction side of what you guys do. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys are doing now that Lago Resort and Casino is seeming to make a full-blown run at opening up out there.
Sure. Well, we got on board right away with recognizing that just like in a dry county, when you introduce a bar, there's going to be an increase in alcohol use.
Yep.
Reasonable to expect that. And as a result, there'll be an increase in alcoholism. It was reasonable to assume that just similar to that, the presence of a casino would increase compulsive or problem gambling within Seneca County. And so we immediately, as a department, sought to engage the casino developers in mitigating that damage. And we specifically looked at the casino developers providing funding so that we could do gambling prevention work, and we could provide direct gambling treatment to those who developed that problem. There are many people within the county that were voicing concerns about this casino who had used, we call it a geographic cure, where you move someplace where you're further away from the problem, and that allows you an opportunity to think before you use. And so people were afraid that now that a casino would be in their backyard, that they would be tempted and might relapse. So we look on increasing the relapse prevention components through prevention and preventing our kids from developing gambling problems as well. We have, from 2008 until 2013 and 14, we have data on gambling behaviors of our kids. We've got a good data set, so we can see the effect pre and post casino. We're going to be measuring it.
Okay.
And as that, and any ripple effects, it's reasonable to assume, are going to be the result.
And you guys can obviously modify your approach as it goes, right?
Absolutely. Direct treatment, we believe that initially there'll be a cadre of people that will become problematic gamblers almost immediately. These are people that are usually financially a little more vulnerable. They're going to get into trouble a lot quicker. We anticipate that there'll be somewhat of a lull, probably, and about 5 years out, we anticipate a spike. Main reason, people that have means will at that point have liquidated their 401ks, their savings accounts, their stocks, whatever means they have, and will now be confronted with the stark reality of that their gambling has now created a financial mess for them. And those people will start to come in. So a lot of the research showed that after the initial spike, the problem went away. They didn't carry the research out long enough to say there's going to be a secondary spike for those people that have a little more means to liquidate.
Oh, okay.
So we are going to be watching it and continuing to watch it. And then as the need for more treatment services increases, we'll be there to meet it.
All right. So, well, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about all of this. These are really important issues that people really should care about. We wish you the best of luck with everything moving forward and appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so that's going to do it for us today. I would like to thank Scott for joining us and wish his organization the best of luck with this ultra-important fight. Remember, for the latest news, updates, and podcasts, you can download the Finger Lakes One app. It's available on Apple and Android devices. You can also check us out on fingerlakes1.com or on your favorite social network at Finger Lakes One. For Scott LaVigne, I'm Josh Durso, reminding you to join us next time on another episode of Inside the FLX.